Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Perfect. Well, yeah, we've got a few people, so I was just checking that everybody can hear us. But yeah, so hello.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for
I'm
having me.
so excited. Yeah. So I just thought I'd do a little bit of housekeeping before we start, just so that people know where to ask questions and things. So if anybody has a question, I'm keeping everybody on mute just so that we can hear Amy talking. Sometimes there can be some background noise otherwise. So yeah, if there's any questions as we're kind of going through, then pop them into there's a little thing at the bottom which says chat. So just pop those in there and then we'll come to those as we're going. Or at the end when there's a convenient time anyway. And yeah, if you've got any questions, you can just ask them in advance. You don't have to wait till the end. So yeah, and just to introduce, obviously everyone knows this is about kind of self-rediscovery. So for me, self-rediscovery is kind of twofold. I think a lot of people expect it to be about kind of creating a life we love and kind of managing life in a way. Whereas for me, it's more about kind of exploring who we are in human form and then seeing almost who we are beyond that, and how actually you can just kind of simply not really do a lot to unravel a life that we love, or kind of fall in love with the life that we already have, right? So yeah, it's quite timely with New Year, because I kind of recommend not really following New Year's resolutions, and I'll be interested in hearing kind of that what you're thinking about that, Amy, with habits. But yeah, so it's all about kind of reconnecting to our wisdom to let that unfold. So we're going to hear from a range of different speakers and explore a range of different topics. But this one is all about habits, and we'll be live most Fridays. So we'll just meet back in the same room. And the replay will also be available on the member vault as well, so you can catch up. And if there are any questions that you maybe don't want to address whilst we're in here, you can always email me or contact me some way, and I'll be able to help with those. I'm going to be jumping on live in the Self-Rediscovery Summit Facebook group as well, so I'm always happy to address any additional questions in there. But for now, we have the amazing Amy Johnson with us. So yeah, she's here to kind of answer questions as well. So I'm really excited to have you here, Amy. And I know many of the others are as well, because I saw it on their little forms that they ticked the box to say that they were excited to hear from you. And yeah, I have your book here, which I must say has kind of profoundly impacted me in a lot of ways, with some of the insights and wisdom in the book as well. And I also loved when I was reading your bios, because you have two bios on your website, and one was kind of very professional and what people would expect to see, I guess, in a bio, and the other one was more kind of human, and that's what I kind of like, because it's like, well, there's the version that we kind of have to play in sometimes, and then there's the version that's like actually who we really are and all about connection. And I love the fact that you're sort of in both. You say obviously you're a psychologist, a coach, and an author of many books, and you share a groundbreaking approach which is very similar to kind of the understanding that it is the same understanding that I'm sharing. But then you also talk about your personal journey, which we're going to hear a bit more about, so I'll kind of let you dive into that and explore that with us. But yeah, I just liked that, how you've done that, because it was like, it kind of really reinforced what this is all about, really. It's like the human version that we play in, and then who we are really beyond that. So yeah.
All
So
that formal stuff, it has to be there, but I don't think it's all that important.
yeah, exactly. It's all just thought. So yeah, so I just wanted to basically introduce you in that way, and then I'd love for you to kind of I think it's really powerful sometimes to share stories and share our journeys, and so I guess really the floor's for you to share what you have seen all about habits and how that can be helpful for us, if we're kind of quite often tempted to lean into forcing, fixing, changing and doing with New Year's resolutions and things. And I'd just like to hear a bit more about your journey, and so maybe you can start by sharing that.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm really, really honored to be part of this. So, oh, my journey with habits. So, when I think about it, I mean, I've like many people. This is not interesting or unique to me really at all. But like many people, just kind of my whole life was looking for like the way to be good enough, to be right. Like it just seemed like there were lots of things that kind of looked like problems for sure. I would have called them problems. Like I worry too much, and I was a little anxious, and then I was a lot anxious at one point in my earlier years, and just my mind ticking off, like, here are the things that are wrong. It was like this running tally of all the things that could be a little bit better. And then I guess my personality, which is also just my mind jabbering on and on about stuff, but like my personality would be like, whoa, well, you're good at making change and like doing stuff. So we're going to get we're going to cross all these off the list this weekend, right? Like you're going to be the right weight and have the right degrees and like have the right friends. And so it was exhausting, as you can imagine, like just constant list of things to do, constant trying to do them all. And not because there was a lot of action so much as, like, now that I think about it, I mean, it's more just the feeling behind it. Like I wasn't okay until like these things were going to make me okay.
Yeah.
I could finally relax when fill in the blank. So as you can imagine, like that, it was a lot of anxiety, a lot of exhaustion. And I think for us humans, like that is our feedback, that the feelings of exhaustion, anxiety, worry, feeling like we don't fit in our own lives, constantly questioning, like, who am I? What's my purpose? All of that. Part of that is all stuff that normal humans go through at various points. It's all stuff we go through at points. So it's not like it's wrong or anything. We all go through that, but we so misunderstand it. I heard those as questions that I needed to answer, like they meant something, they were real. And now what I kind of see about that is like, that all of that just exhaustion and all of that is like, it's our mind just trying to secure itself with some identity that we think is going to make us happy, but it never works because it doesn't work that way. So, so as we're feeling exhausted and everything, we're also at the same time looking for anything we can to feel better. And that's where I think a lot of our habits come in, where we don't feel well, we're not at home in our lives and ourselves. So we go out and we find whatever we find, and we don't do it on purpose, but we stumble upon things in life. So like everyone here has stumbled upon several things in life that have taken the edge off of our discomfort. And remember, all our discomfort is a bunch of thinking. It's just a mind running on repeat saying you're not okay. That's all it is. But we think it's real, it feels horrible. So we find things that take the edge off, and it could be food, alcohol, working, internet, relationships, approval, whatever it might be. And in some level, like that kind of makes us feel better for a minute. And so that our brain kind of says, oh, here's the thing, So it's so ironic because we end up with these habits that are just something we found to try to feel more like ourselves. They're not in and of themselves harmful or wrong. They don't mean anything. Everybody has them. They don't mean anything about us. But then those habits become big problems. Like that, it goes onto your list, oh, now I have to break this habit. So you see how it's just this big cycle. And I love the fact that the whole cycle is just rooted in misunderstanding. So if we can understand who we are and how our experience works more, there's no more cycle in the same way, which is awesome. It's great news.
Yeah. Maybe you can explain for those people who don't get what the misunderstanding might be. Maybe you could explore that a little bit.
Yeah. So there's pieces to it, but I think, one of the biggest pieces is part of the misunderstanding is like when we don't feel well, I'll just use that as in a very general way. But when, again, and I mean, like if you're worried, anxious, exhausted, chronic health issues, you don't feel like you're in the right place, like you're, any of that, you're living in your head. When we don't feel like kind of just at ease and kind of natural in our lives, what that's always showing us is that our mind is running. Like we're experiencing thought all the time, right? And so that uncomfortable thought, we get really caught up in it, and it looks absolutely real. It looks like it's about us or our life, but it can't be really. It's just a mind running. So like I said, like my mind was always saying all the things that weren't quite good enough or whatever. And the misunderstanding in that example is like, I thought that was absolutely true. I thought I'm smart. I must be telling myself the truth, right? It must be like, it must be that I'm not good enough.
I know. Yeah.
So I look out there to fix it, and you don't get help that way.
No, and it's so believable, isn't it? Because for me, when I was suffering, because I guess for me, I call it suffering. That's just another word for like a problem that I might have. When I was suffering, I would always kind of believe my thoughts. I wasn't even really aware that I was thinking until I kind of came across this understanding, it is kind of more of a misunderstanding. Yeah. And then I guess for me, where that becomes interesting is in New Year's resolutions, because I guess that then is just us kind of seeking to improve or fix or change or do something. So how do you feel about that?
Well, I think as humans, we do want to make change, and we do want to do things we're not currently doing. And that's all wonderful. Yeah. But it's like where it goes wrong for people is when it looks, when our well-being is like hinged on the outcome, when it looks
like we need it.
Yeah, we need it. Or like, then I'll be happy, or my life will be better. So that's the first piece. Like, you want it just because you want it, not because you need it, and definitely not because it means something about you as a person or any of that, because it's going to get messy really quickly.
Yeah. I think the way that I kind of understood that was I really love meditation, but when I kind of dived into self-help, there would be certain self-help things that I would do that didn't really, I was doing them because I thought I should. And so for me, that kind of was how that played out. It was like, I guess the same with New Year's resolutions. Like if we love running and we've made it a New Year's resolution to go running, you kind of don't need to, you just run, right? But I guess if you're forcing yourself to do the running because you think you should, because it's coming from this misunderstanding that you're not enough without running, then that's when it kind of leads you away from well-being, I guess.
Yeah. Or like if you love running and you make a resolution to run a marathon. Now you might love going for like 5-mile runs. You might make a resolution to run a marathon and get to the part of the training where you're going for 10-mile runs and hate every minute of it. Yeah. And if you're like just in your head where it's like, well, I said I would do this and the marathon is going to make me worthy, or I can put it on Instagram, or what, if there's like something that's not really all that important to who you really are, it's just not going to feel well. Now, on the flip side, you might decide to run a marathon and you get to the 10-mile runs and it's hard. It's the hardest thing you've ever done, but it still feels good. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I'm not saying don't do hard things or that it'll always be easy, but it's a different feeling.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it is about the feeling. I guess you also then mentioned who we really are. So I don't know whether you can kind of expand a bit more on that for those who may not really understand that, because I think me talking about self-rediscovery, for me, I talk about like, we're rediscovering who we really are, but sometimes I think it's not necessarily obvious what that means.
Yeah. And it's always a funny thing because it's like, well, how do you say in words who we really, and don't believe me, listen to yourselves of who we really are. But I think kind of what I'm pointing to and what you're pointing to when we sort of talk about this, I think, is who we aren't is the labels, the physical, the form, the psychology, even our thoughts, feelings, behavior. And the reason I say that's not who we are is because that stuff is always changing forever and ever, and it always has been. There's no real there. Now, yes, we can say, oh, but I've had this personality trait forever, or I've had this habit for 10 years. It's real. It's there. Not really. It's not there all the time. It comes and goes. It like moves through you. It changes. So who we really are, like there's something there that's stable and that isn't constantly changing. And the way I kind of see that is it's like, I think like we kind of are this energy, this space within which all this experience moves through. So
Mm.
we aren't this thought, that thought, this behavior, that thing we said last week to our mom, whatever, like that thing you regret.
Yeah.
All of that comes and goes.
Yeah.
But we are this bigger essence, this consciousness maybe, and an experience moves through us.
Yeah, I love that, and it has a nice feeling. It's a beautiful feeling to it as well. I
Yeah.
think when you're kind of tapped into that space. So I guess there are different labels for that as well. So like I would call that wisdom, which is I guess kind of why this is phrased as like reconnecting to your wisdom. But there's loads of other different labels that we give that, because it's something we can't really put words to, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
I don't know. So I think for some people that could be labeled as kind of divinity or nature or love or whatever it is to them.
I think I mean, that, like you said, there's a nice feeling there. The
Yeah,
way I kind of think of it a lot too, just to make it sort of simple, is like everything kind of good that we're wanting is who and what we already are.
yeah.
So like peace, it's
Mm.
peace, it's resilience, it's health, it's wisdom, common sense, well-being.
Yeah,
Because and again, like the way that I think we can say that that's the case is that when our thinking settles down, that's where we find ourselves.
yeah.
We don't relax in our beds at night and like get all peaceful and then we find horrible stuff there. Like that's made of thinking, like
Yeah,
that's your thinking's all jacked up if that's what's happening. But when our psychology quiets, like it's amazing feeling. So there's
mm.
something in there we can point toward.
Yeah, yeah. And when I was Googling what a habit was, it was talking very much about kind of routine behaviors repeated, and it said that it comes from the subconscious. I think the subconscious can also get kind of banded around as wisdom. So I don't know if you want to talk a little to that.
Yeah, I see kind of conscious and subconscious as thought. Like, and I kind of don't know that the distinction. I mean, clearly there's a big distinction, and people out in the world talk about it. But I don't know. I kind of see it as all the same. Like it's still this thought experience moving through us. So I would say, and it sounds like what you would say, is wisdom is deeper than all of that.
Yeah.
Wisdom is something that it doesn't show up in our head as thought or as it's more like something deeper that kind of lives us in a sense.
Yeah, I like to call it kind of the natural intelligence behind life, I guess. Something
Yeah.
you don't really need to think about, it just kind of happening as it is. Yeah. I also, in your book, love how you talk about the inner lizard. And I just wondered whether you could talk a little bit about that, because that's quite a nice metaphor, I think.
Yeah. So it's nicknamed the inner lizard because it's kind of some of that subconscious thought, and it's coming from, it's just our brain, which I love seeing our brain as just this machine. It's just, because I think it's very easy to get caught up in, like, especially nowadays when there's so much about rewiring and, neuroscience, which is super interesting, but people try to do stuff to change their brain because that looks like what we need to do.
Yeah.
But just see the brain as like just this machine that kind of just does what it does with absolute wisdom driving it always, no exceptions. So the inner lizard is like that very old part of our brain that is responsible for just basically keeping us alive. So it's all about efficiency. It's all about habit and routine, because it needs to beat our heart every minute, like until we die, right? It needs to have routine and habit. It's essential. So it'll notice those things, like you're feeling horrible and all of that, and you take a drink and suddenly you feel better. Your inner lizard doesn't know that you just put alcohol in your body and that's not good for you in the long run. Your inner lizard says, ooh, I think that might be necessary for survival. That did something good. So the inner lizard's like that part that kind of grabs onto our habits and then just plays them out over and over again. But it's so cool to see, like, that means you have a well-working brain. Because again, like that, we can look at that and think that's the enemy, and we'll try to change our brain and everything. And it's kind of taken the wrong approach, because now we're trying to change and attack a brain that's just doing the best it knows, the best it can to help us.
Yeah.
So if we can understand it rather than try to change it, it goes a lot better. So we just see, oh yeah, I conditioned my brain. Like for me, my habit was binge eating for a long time. I taught my lower brain to keep demanding food. And I did that just by, when it would, I would feed it. It's just that simple. And obviously didn't want that to happen, but that's how it went. So when we kind of just understand it sometimes at a mechanical level like that, it's so freeing. That was huge for me because I could see, wow, this isn't about me being weak or having this disorder. Like none of that is what really matters. What really matters is my brain's trying to keep me alive, and it thinks that when I have these urges, I need food to survive. It's not true, but it thinks that. So my brain is just going to scream louder. But even when my brain is screaming louder, I can say, oh, cute little lizard, I don't need to eat a gallon of ice cream right now to feel better. That's not necessary for my survival. And I could just see that in a way that, it became a lot less powerful.
And so that's kind of, I guess, is that the insight that you had when you were kind of going through that suffering, I guess?
It was one of them. It was one of the biggest and first ones for sure, that when I felt this feeling, this urge that just felt so overwhelming, that all that was energy. And then my brain was trying to help me, but it was not giving me the helpful direction.
So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that journey, about what life looked like when you were kind of in that suffering, and what you saw exactly that kind of took you through into kind of coming to peace with that, I guess, and finding freedom from it.
Yeah, I think in it, again, it always looked like I had a problem. Mm-hmm. Like that is so huge to see this, because I'm 100% suggesting that none of us have any problems. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, especially when you're doing destructive habits that really are wrecking your health and your relationships and your finances. Mm-hmm. We need to look a little bit deeper and see, so when my mind would habitually just, go toward food all the time, whether it was eating a ton of it or deciding to not eat any of it for a long time, it was always talking about that. It felt like, and there would be so much energy and so much discomfort that would come up with that. That looked to me like a problem that I had to overpower, so that's how it looked at the time. And so I would fight it, and I would try to distract myself, and I would try to say mantras, and I would try to meditate in the middle of that, and I would try to pray. I would do anything I could. Yeah. And because it looked like this big, powerful force that had always beaten me in the past, wasn't very successful. So eventually, most times, I would give in and just eat the food. Mm. And so what that looked like is, again, that was just confirming my misunderstanding. It was my misunderstanding. It was telling me, in my thinking at that time, see, I did everything I could. I tried really hard, but the only thing that made me feel better was food. Mm-hmm. So I kept feeling more and more like a victim. And then what I saw, again, it's so hard because it's been 10 years and I don't really know what I saw. Do you know what I mean? Like you see things, you have shifts, and then you try to explain it in words later. So just kind of put those brackets up. But one of the things I saw is what you had just pointed out, that my brain was doing that for good reason. My brain was just conditioned. It thought it had my survival at its interest, but I knew, obviously everyone knows you don't need to binge eat for survival. So as soon as I just saw that, it really did take a lot of the tension and pressure off, because now it stopped looking like quite so much of a problem. It looked less like, oh, wow, I have binge eating disorder, or I have bulimia or whatever. And it looked like, oh, my brain is confused and I keep giving into it. Yeah. So already that went a long way. And then I could kind of just feel those urges, feel that habitual stuff a little bit more without feeling like I had to give in. Another piece I saw really early on in that journey is that when I didn't give in, my brain would eventually stop doing that. So I mean that like in the immediate term and then also long term. So if I was in and like I would wake up with just obsessed with going to get binge food and binging all day. Yeah. And if I could just let that be there a little bit, it would come and go and ebb and flow throughout the day. And eventually my brain would move on. Yeah. And in the bigger picture, that's how I saw myself that I could actually be free of this habit at some point in the future. I saw,
Yeah.
wow, if I do that, if I let my brain talk, but I don't give into it over and over and over, day after day,
Yeah.
eventually my brain is going to move on from that story because it's going to see that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because I guess what helped you to not act on it? Was it kind of just pausing, or?
It was really seeing that there was nothing inherently powerful happening.
Yeah.
The only reason I ever acted on it is because I misunderstood it and I thought I had to act on it. I thought it was more powerful than me. And so I just gave in, like I thought I have to eat in order to feel better. It's the only way out of this feeling. And as soon as I saw, even just in theory, as soon as I saw, no, that's not the case. Your brain will stop if you give it a chance to stop. I just tested that theory. Like,
Right.
okay, I'll
You're
sit in
kind of
this.
playing with it,
Yeah.
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 Cool.
And not, let me just say quickly, because this is a big part of a lot of habits, not playing with it the way I used to, which was very all or nothing. Not saying, okay, I'm going to trust this. I'm going to play with this theory and I'm never going to give in again. No, I would just play with it in terms of like, well, let me just see if I can sit here for a minute.
Yeah.
Let me see if I sit here for, maybe today I won't binge. Like, it was a very slow process in that way.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's really interesting, because not only is obviously dieting and kind of that sort of stuff is quite a New Year resolution thing. But for me personally, I see the principles in so much, and I see so much, but eating is always something that I struggle with. I would say that that's one thing that I struggle with. Despite understanding that it's a misunderstanding. So I like that. I think for me, that's really definitely added something, and I'm going to play with that myself. And I also love, because I know in your bio, you say that you were told that you would have like this illness for life, I guess. And again, that's kind of, I think, worth talking about, because that's almost a new kind of way forward with psychology, that we see that is not really, it isn't that we have a problem.
Yeah.
So I guess, can you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah. Right before this call, I was interviewing someone for my podcast, and we did like a change story episode. So he is a guy who had episodes of major depression throughout his life. And so he had that diagnosis, like recurring major depression or whatever the diagnosis was. And it's so funny because he said, because he's seen a ton about this understanding and he sees things so differently now. And I asked him, I said, how do you feel about depression now? Like, are you afraid that it's going to come back? Do you think it would be different? Whatever. And he said, I kind of see that I feel depressed every single day, but just for moments. And then I come out of it, like thought and moods move around.
Yeah.
That's huge. So it's so cool, because it's like, yeah, we all have major, recurring depression. That's not the way that the clinicians mean it, but really it's like, maybe not the major part, but recurring depression. Yeah. Hey, we have recurring fear, recurring worry, recurring depression, recurring happiness, recurring excitement. Every human on earth all the time.
Yeah, recurring habits. Yeah.
Yes, everything. So yeah, I think, that's just, it's an older way of kind of looking at a set of behaviors and then, just putting this big blanket on it. But what this understanding helps us do is just drill down. And it's like, just because there's this certain blip of energy moving through you and you tend to act on it, life is so fluid. It's always changing. And to the extent that it isn't, if it feels like your life is very habitual or you're stuck in something, it's not because life has it wrong. It's because when that happens, we think, oh, yep, there's my habit. I'll never beat this like I did. Oh, yep, here it is again. It's stronger than me. I might as well give in. So you kind of come to see, in full innocence, like I did that to myself the whole time just by thinking it was powerful when it really wasn't. And I think that's how all of our issues, all of our habits are.
And so I guess from my experience was that once I saw that, it kind of, the thinking almost falls away by itself. Yeah. I don't know if that was your experience as well.
Yeah. And again, not like for me anyway, it wasn't in one giant
Yeah.
insight, fell swoop, all gone. But
Yeah.
I think it's like, it just feels less and less powerful, I think. And then
Yeah.
it just, kind of feels like it falls away.
Yeah, and I guess I was intrigued because obviously your book is all about the no willpower approach to breaking any habit. So I guess for me, it's like I always say there's nothing to do. So I guess that's what you mean by that. And I wondered whether you could talk a little bit about that and what you mean by the no willpower approach.
Yeah. Well, I think, when I look back, so much of what I tried to do to get myself out of binge eating was willpower. It was like, so meaning there was a thought feeling there, and I tried to be more powerful than it. I tried to beat it down or overcome it or change it or be stronger than it or whatever. And I think that's what we do. And that's why our New Year's resolutions only last 3.5 weeks on average, because willpower is not, we can't use it forever. It's exhausting. And so we can use willpower to a certain degree, but what really leads to deep and like lasting change is when we see our experience in a new way. And then, like you just said, it feels more like it falls away.
Yeah.
So like what I was describing, and I saw that my brain was just trying to help me and I didn't have to act on these feelings. I still had to use a little effort at times. I still had to kind of sit there and decide to not give in and all that, but totally different. It was action as like a supplement rather than action as the leading force. It's more like, running the 10 miles to get toward the marathon, even though it's hard, but secretly being super proud of yourself and loving that you're doing it, versus running a marathon because that's going to make you worthy and hating every second of it. So
yeah, it's kind of like that. But like I say, that unraveling of the life that you love. It's like there's nothing really to do. It's just, it kind of just happens. I guess.
Or there might be things you do along the way, but
Yeah.
you don't have to do those to make it happen. That more comes from the insight.
Yes. Yeah. And you talk about in your book actually the power of understanding and insight versus information. I guess could you explain a bit more about that as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of along those same lines. It's like, when we have a sea change, like when we see things in a new way, we can't help but have our behavior change. Like it will just change on its own. But when we're out just trying to gather information, it's that's more outside in. Like having a sea change or an insight is inside out. So it's such a different, like an example that I use a lot, and I'm sure other people use it, is like with little kids. Like if my kid is like afraid of the monster in his room, that's actually a shadow. If when he grows up enough to see, or I can convince him enough that he really, really, truly sees, oh, there's no monster here, it's a shadow. You kind of can't be afraid of it. Once you've seen it for what it is, you can't force himself to be afraid anymore. But until then, he's going to be afraid, and no amount of information. Come on, go to sleep. You'll be okay. None of that goes anywhere.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, we have one question actually. I don't know if anybody else has got any more questions, but I'll just read this one as it's kind of a relevant time to read it, I think. Someone says, how do you recommend we quiet that psychology and come to terms with ourselves to feel okay?
Yeah. I think it happens when we see it for what it is. So take the how out of it in a sense, because there's no thing that we're responsible for or have to do. But I think what we do, I mean, I guess this is an answer to a how question. We keep exploring, like, what is this psychology really? What is this feeling really? So in that example of this overwhelming urge that feels so powerful, I would just jump in my head and be like, don't like this, get me out of it. But if we really look at that, what is it? It's energy moving through our bodies, and then it's a bunch of thinking. It's just repetitive, habitual, same old thinking that says, you can't handle this. This is horrible. Oh no, discomfort, bad, suffering. But if we really just look a little bit deeper, it isn't how it appears. And same with any thoughts, any negative talk, like any of that stuff we experience, any insecurity, any lack of self-esteem, like all of that stuff is a mind telling us the same stuff over and over again. And it's not the truth. It never has been the truth, but it's so in our faces that we think it's us. So when we really explore that, those two things, like what the psychology is, because it's not as powerful as it seems, and then who and what we are beyond the psychology, that when we don't listen to our mind so much, there's a nice feeling there. There's strength that comes up and resilience and all of that. You kind of just explore those more and more. And then I think the scales shift a bit. So instead of only focusing on our thoughts and feelings and form and what's around us, like you kind of just start to get a feel for the bigger essence that we really are.
Mm. Mm. And I guess, I don't know if that answers that, Diane. Let me know if you want us to kind of dive into that a bit more. I guess, is there another kind of example other than binge eating that you could talk us through that might be useful for people who are kind of suffering with something else, I guess, that's another habit that maybe they resonate with?
Yeah. Well, the cool thing about this is that all habits are really exactly the same. So we can talk through more to kind of just bring it to life. But I think it's so important to see that. And really, it's not just behavioral habits like I eat or smoke or drink or whatever, or gamble or shop too much or whatever that might be. It's, thought and feeling habits too. So I consider worry a habit, and it works exactly the same way as any other physical habit. The only difference is like, if you are anxious, let's say you feel a lot of anxiety or you worry a lot, or you live in your head a lot, that's also happening with somebody who drinks too much or binge eats or is on the internet too much. It's just that they're taking that outside step to calm that down. That's the only difference. So I just say that because I know that's a big question for a lot of people. They find it hard to kind of see how this fits with their habit, but I really, just want to reassure everyone it's all exactly the same. So I don't know. I mean, we could pick any, but I just earlier was talking with a woman who has a phobia of flying. I mean, that's, again, it's not a habit in the traditional sense of what we would consider a habit. But when we really look at that, it's so interesting. I kind of love phobias because they're so funny in a way. Like, we feel a bunch of stuff. We feel a bunch of anxious energy. We say, oh, bad, 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 dangerous, dangerous. And then it really goes kind of in this direction. And then our mind pins it on some outside circumstance and says, you caused this. So in her case, she feels all anxious. She has some thinking. She feels all anxious. And her mind says, oh, it's because of flying. It's because of flying. But what's so fascinating is 99% of, she doesn't really fly because she has this phobia. So she's experiencing this phobia of flying all the time, and she's on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's so cool to see, like, you're not afraid of flying. You're afraid of your thinking. All that is this anxious energy. That's what you're afraid of because you're sitting here in a chair talking to me. Like, we're not in an airplane. You can't say you're afraid of flying.
Yeah.
So it's different.
That fear, and it's not even a reality at the time. It's literally just coming from our thought.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I love that. And it's funny how we can do the same the opposite way when we think there's a good feeling. It's like if we're sitting outside in nature and we're seeing the trees kind of shimmer. It's like, oh, the tree's beautiful. It's like as if that tree is giving us that good feeling as well.
Yeah, totally.
It's quite funny.
So even with other habits, so in that case, she's just feeling some energy, but she's pinning it on flying as if that's the thing causing it. And of course, that's creating all kinds of more angst because now what's wrong with me and why can't I ever go anywhere and all this stuff. It's the same like if you smoke or drink or internet, let's say internet's such a popular one these days, common one these days. Like, it's the same thing. It's like you don't feel well. And I mean that again, very broadly, like you're just feeling some discomfort. And you go sit online for hours and do whatever you do there. And it feels like it calms you. Somewhere in your mind has told you, oh, this is what I need. Ah, now I feel better. This did it. And that's not doing it.
No, it's like a temporary thing because you think that it's doing it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It becomes conditioned where we think, oh, internet does it. And so then we go to the internet and our mind does calm down, but it didn't do it. It just like our mind just has a mind of its own. Our mind just comes and goes and does what it does anyway.
I guess in the same way, like if we're fulfilling our New Year's resolutions, we think that it's okay and we think that it's good and we feel good because we're thinking that that's a good thing. But
then we're winning.
Yeah, we're winning. Yeah, until we're not.
Exactly. Those are that's like the golden handcuffs, right? Because you're winning. Oh, yay, great. But at some point you won't win and then you're in trouble.
Yeah, and really it's all just thought. Yeah, no, it's funny. And I think actually talking about setbacks, I think it's interesting as well because we are human. And so I guess sometimes when we kind of get into that thinking, I guess what's your advice to someone who is kind of stuck in that thinking, like, oh, I'm in a setback?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, for some reason, just the way you said, like, I'm in a setback, really just kind of like, we're not in anything. Do you know, like our mind of course, on some level we are, because our mind is always wanting to tell us how things are going. So our mind will say, hey, it's Friday, you're in a setback, it's raining outside. Like it's just constantly, and it just does that again, because it's trying to just be efficient, let us know, like everything's under control. It gives us this false sense of control. So it wants to say, oh, here's where you are now. But really, it's like life is moment to moment to moment. So if you hadn't drank or smoked or whatever for 6 months and you just did, well, you can have the thought, I'm in a setback, or you can just have a thought, I'm here right now. And what's coming up? What's here right now? So and that's not just, I don't know, as I say that, it sounds like I'm sure people can hear that as like a nice way of just justifying it. So I'm not saying like, oh, just go on and, do your habit forever, but to really see that this whole setback idea, man, it creates more suffering for people than almost anything. And it truly isn't necessary. Even just in terms of how we are as humans, how our mind works, our brain, remember, is all about routine and efficiency and what's familiar, just to keep us safe and keep its resources under wraps. So when we do something, even if it's harmful for us for a long time, and then we don't do it, to some degree, our brain's like, wait a minute, we should do this thing again. That's what we do. Like, this is who you are. That's just how the brain sees it. So there's actually it sounds negative, but like there's a lot of momentum in favor of like going back to how things were. So what that means is everybody has setbacks. And it's not really a setback. It's just your mind remembering, and you can just see, oh yeah, I don't do that anymore. And fun.
Yeah. And I guess, that's, it's kind of meaningless because even the thinking about a setback is still just thinking about a setback, right? So we have another question, which says, there is talk of suffering. How do you see past your thoughts when you're in the middle of a thought storm?
Yeah. In the middle can be difficult because it's by definition, when you're in the middle of a thought storm, you and your wisdom and your clarity are still there, but there's a lot of stuff swirling around and it's in your face and you're wrapped up in it, right? That's what a thought storm is. So I don't know of a strategy or a way that we can ever see it in the middle of it. But the good news is, better news even than a strategy that helps you see it in the middle of it, is that the more we just see how thought works and how resilient we are, and that it's always changing, and that a thought storm always only means that you're in a thought storm. The more we see it in that bigger picture way, the more you get in thought storms, and then you're not so worried about it.
Yeah,
Like the guy I was telling you, like with the depression, he feels depression every day, but it's not major recurring depression. It's, oh, I feel a feeling.
yeah, yeah. No, that's very true. And for me, I very much see that. If somebody kind of doesn't see how resilient they are, then I guess it can be difficult to see how that makes sense. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. If we don't, I think it's hard to see how resilient we are when we've been looking at our experience and our outcomes forever.
Yeah.
And we all have, because that's where we look. That's just where we're conditioned to look. And so when we're looking at, I've had this habit for 10 years, or I felt this way for this long, or whatever, we can be almost blind to our resilience. But that's why we do summits like these. That's why we get into this conversation. It's like, well, how about just, this is all that's happening is we've gone through life and we say, see, there's a hand right in front of my face. You can't tell me there isn't. There's nothing else. There's this hand in my face. But then we come to a summit like this, and then we're like, and they say, hey, if you just look a little bit to the left of your hand, there's a whole new world over there. And then we try it, and then you're like, hey, notice there's some resilience in there. Look for it. And then you see it, and it's amazing. It sounds so dumb and simple, but honestly, it is just that. Our mind just goes in the same direction until we try to look in another one. And I remember when I first came across this, my mentors were constantly saying things like, look within and all that. And, I'm sure we've all heard that a million times, and it's so annoying. I'm like, I don't know what that means and how, and all those same questions everyone has. But there was something comforting in just knowing, okay, there is another place to look. I don't know how to look there right this minute, but I know that at least what I am seeing is not the end all be all. Like, this is not reality. Do you know what I mean? And so that maybe that's just the start, and that's a great start.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of staying curious maybe, and keeping a conversation about it, because I think that's what helped me most, was kind of just staying curious and being like, oh, well, what is this? This is different to what I've heard before. And it kind of makes sense. It's kind of simple. So what is it that I'm kind of not seeing at the moment in this? And the more I stepped with kind of investigating it, the more I did see. So I guess maybe the practical advice, I guess if people are looking for that practical advice of how to deal with it, I guess maybe it is just kind of staying curious and staying in that conversation, would you say?
Yeah. And just kind of stepping into the unknown. I mean, curious is such a good word. It's because it's not like investigate, figure it out. Like, there's just nothing hard about it. It's very open and curious. And the more we can just be kind of dumb about it and say, I have no idea what this is, but my mind's not making up what I think it is. I'm just willing to hear whatever I hear. It's a great way to see more.
Yeah. And I love that you kind of say, we have no idea, because I think that is also something that's quite helpful to see sometimes, is that we really all have no idea. We're kind of all making it up anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just see if there's any more questions. I don't know if anybody wants to come on live and speak, or whether anybody else has any more questions for Amy. So just let me know if you are wanting to ask anything. Let me just have a little look at if I had any more questions for you myself. Is there anything particular that you wanted to add?
I just love the theme of this, like the self-rediscovery, and like, I don't know, I heard this question a long time ago, and I've heard it in various forms, but and I don't even remember the initial form, but it's something like, rather than kind of like, who do I want to be, or what do I want to make happen in my life in 2020, or whatever that kind of way to say the question would be, it's almost like, what wants to happen?
Yeah, I love that.
What wants to come through me? Because it moves our mind and our ego out of the way, and it truly is discovery. It's not self-creation from the mind. You know what I mean? It's discovery. And so I think even with habits, it's a super relevant thing of like, we have this thing and we don't like it and we want to be rid of it. But again, it's so natural for our mind to have all these ideas of how it should go. And how it should look. And it's like, what if I just see, wow, an urge is just energy. And then and nothing else, just take your hands off the wheel. And then let's discover what wants to happen. Because I can tell you, like, by seeing hundreds, probably almost 1,000 people at this point, watching them through this process, kind of find themselves free of habits, it is almost always way better than they think it's going to be.
Yeah.
They come in thinking, I just want to get rid of the cigarettes, I want to stop smoking. And then it's like they see so much and their life changes, and like, and not because they quit smoking, but because they opened up to this.
Yeah.
So don't limit ourselves in anything, like, let's just discover, just like you said it, discover who we are.
That is, and it's kind of that bigger picture, because when we just look at the habit, it's very kind of like, we just want to fix it. And for me, that was my whole journey with the three principles understanding. Is kind of like, I thought I was broken and that I needed to fix and change. And so I kind of explored all the different self-help tools that were out there, and I kind of just exhausted myself. Like you were saying, it's so exhausting thinking about all the things that we had to do or fix all of the time. And then when I came across this understanding, it just flipped everything, because I was like, oh wait, there's nothing to do. We're already okay as we are, and it's just our mind playing tricks. So yeah, thank you so much. There is another question from Jill. She says, what's the name of your book, Amy? So I know you have a couple, so maybe you want to share those.
Yeah. So The Little Book of Big Change is the book around habits that a lot of the stuff we've been talking about, but it goes into a lot of detail. And again, like, I consider all habits the same. So it's great for anxiety, worry, like any kind of habit. And then I have a book called Being Human, which is just kind of more general, kind of my own thoughts and reflections, like, from this understanding more generally.
Yeah, it's amazing. I have it here. It's orange. So it's really cool. And you also have your school, don't you?
Yeah.
Which is also cool, which I guess you could tell us a little bit more about that if you wanted.
Yeah. So the Little School of Big Change, based on the Little Book of Big Change, is it's a 6-week course. There are people from 39 countries in it right now. So it's very global. It's a 6-week online course. And there's a whole curriculum developed around kind of walking people through this understanding. So starting off very, kind of similar to some of the questions Nicole's asking, like, who are we and like, who are we not? But we really break it down little by little and kind of walk people through an understanding of this, so that by the end of 6 weeks, you're seeing yourself and your habits and how your mind works in a totally different way. People come in, I'm there supporting you. We do calls all the time, 2 calls a week for 6 weeks. There's a forum, and people come in, some people come in with specific habits or anxiety or specific things, even like a relationship issue or something they want to change. And others come in because they're just curious about seeing more. And it's just awesome. We hang out for 6 weeks and a lot happens for people.
That's really cool. Yeah, bet that has a good feeling. I was just looking back at your bio, and you talk about it as a down-to-earth spiritual understanding. And I guess for me, I just wanted to talk a little bit about it being a spiritual understanding, because I know you're also a psychologist. So how did the two kind of merge together, I guess? It's just another question.
Yeah, I think for me, the way this feels spiritual rather than psychological more so is that we're just looking at how it works. So like how the spiritual or formless turns into form. So for sure, I talk a lot about psychology still, like we talked a lot about it here, the brain and how mind and our thoughts and feelings, but it's a different angle on that. It's not like, let's change our psychology or do this intervention. It's more about like, oh, when we add in the spiritual component, when we see that all of our form, all of our psychology is actually just formless taking form, it's all spiritual and taking this temporary form that changes itself and fixes itself, then there's nothing really to intervene with. We just want to understand it.
Yeah. Lovely. And I think there's lots of, again, it's like there's lots of different labels for that. Some people might see it as spiritual. Some people might take lessons from nature, like we said earlier. For me, I like to look to nature as that kind of bigger intelligence behind life as well.
Yeah.
Yes, wonderful, lovely. Well, yeah, I guess if people want to hear more from you, where can they find out about you? I guess you have your website, and I can post that in the group as well, because we've got the online member vault. So I don't know if you just want to share it here, and then I can pop the details in.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably the best place. So it's just
Yeah.
dramyjohnson.com. It's just dramyjohnson.com. And then I have a podcast, and you'll find all kinds of stuff on that site.
Perfect. And there's just some messages of thank you, Amy. That's all we've got left. There's no more questions. So yeah, if anybody does have any more questions, I am more than willing to kind of answer them in the Facebook Live. So just let me know, just message me. And next week, just to do a bit more housekeeping on what's going to be going on next week, we're going to be talking about intuitive eating next week with a lady called Catherine Kimber, but it will unavoidably be pre-recorded. But again, if there's anybody who has any questions about intuitive eating, then just let me know and I can put those forward to Catherine in advance. And also if there are any questions following the recording when you've watched it, then I'm happy to jump on and do a Q&A about that as well. So I think that's pretty much everything. Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. I've really enjoyed that chat, and yeah, it's recorded, so I'm sure a lot of other people will be listening into that as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for listening.
Everyone's saying, love this session. Dr. Johnson, you're so warm and fascinating. That's lovely. That's a nice comment there. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.